What is up guys, Broken Ronin here, and in this video I'm going to be explaining Immeasurable Void. Muryo Kujo, otherwise known as Immeasurable Void, is the domain expansion of Gojo Satoru. If you watched my last explained video where I talked about domain expansions as a concept, you would know that this domain is a pocket space created by cursed energy and manifested through a cursed technique, as explained in chapter 15 of the Jujutsu Kaisen manga. In this same chapter, the ability of Immeasurable Void is explained. In its most general form, it is sensory and communication manipulation. Infinite knowledge and stimulus is brought to the focus when this domain is unleashed, and anyone not in contact with Gojo will experience the negative effects of having this much information flood their senses. As this flooding occurs, the opponent is rendered immobile. They cannot move or even speak as the information is far too vast for them to be able to even take an action. Gojo himself implies that the influx of information created by Immeasurable Void's expansion is, well, limitless, as his technique is brought into reality and forced onto his opponent. However, we see upon other activations of his domain expansion later in the series, time to information ratio can actually be calculated and is not in and of itself limitless. Now, quickly before I do those calculations, just know that it's implied toward the end of the Star Plasma Vessel arc that Gojo was working towards developing his domain. However, a specific time frame as to when he could actually do this was never confirmed. In any case, chapter 89 gives us all the proper tools to get a pretty good estimate on the information and time ratio of Immeasurable Void. In fact, the calculation itself becomes rather simple once you plug in the times and numbers that Gojo threw out in this chapter. You see, he expands Immeasurable Void in this instance for 0.2 seconds, merely 1/5 of a second. In this time frame, Gojo estimates that everyone in range will be flooded with about a half year's worth of information, or about 6 months. This means you can safely assume that for every 1 second you spend within Immeasurable Void, you are flooded with about 2.5 years worth of information. This makes any other calculations that you would like to make relatively easy, as all you would have to do is plug in whatever hypothetical time you want to the 2.5 years worth of information per second, and you'd be able to get a relatively good estimate as to how much information you're getting. Obviously, assuming Gojo made his estimations correctly and, going off of what Gege Akutami implied through Gojo's dialogue. On top of this insane time to information ratio, Immeasurable Void also has special properties or traits that aren't necessarily granted to other sorcerers and curses with domain expansions. The first of these many advantages is the potency or power of the domain expansion itself. Gojo's explanation of what constitutes a more potent domain is rather vague. However, when two territories clash, the more polished one will win. This can be somewhat dependent on cursed energy volume and compatibility, but for whatever reason, Gojo was able to overpower Jogo's domain expansion with one of his own. Based on statements and feats from various times in the series, we can also determine that because of how strong Jogo is, we can also kind of incorporate that strength to his domain expansion, which would put Gojo's domain in the upper echelon of finesse and skill, only being rivaled or surpassed by other creatures of insane potential and skill. Because of this, Gojo is most likely to win a domain expansion battle with anyone that he happens to come across. The second unique trait or advantage that Gojo's domain has is basically an indefensible attack in even more ways than your typical domain. While most domains are tough to deal with in and of themselves, the main problem to handle is the fact that techniques will always hit unless you counteract their domain with the domain expansion of your own, or a simple domain, or another much more niche technique only used by a handful of characters in the series. Now, while troublesome to deal with, a domain expansion can possibly be nullified or handled even after you are completely encompassed within it, so long as you have the proper technique to handle it. With Gojo's Immeasurable Void, you aren't necessarily presented this luxury. Even if you have a simple domain or somehow have a domain expansion potent enough to overpower his, the only way to not lose out to him is to either activate your expansion first, or be fast enough to react to his domain expansion before Immeasurable Void's technique takes effect. If you aren't able to check at least one of these boxes, no matter what you do, you will not be able to do anything, as you will be rendered motionless from the burden of the nigh omniscience that Immeasurable Void grants you. Now, this third trait and advantage is more prescribed to Gojo as a character and powerhouse in the series rather than Immeasurable Void itself, and this is the frequency in which it can be expanded. Megumi states, or more rather implies in chapter 109, that it is uncommon for someone to be able to open multiple domain expansions within quick succession. In fact, because the opponent he is fighting, Dagon, is not Gojo, it should be impossible for it to do so. This implies that Megumi thinks or somehow has some outside knowledge that Gojo can open multiple domains in a single day. This is also further corroborated in chapter 140 by Yuta, because he says that Gojo uses an infinitesimally small amount of cursed energy due to the 6 eyes, and says in fact that Gojo cannot run out of cursed energy, also lending to the idea that he can spam domain expansions, a very intensive technique, mind you, if necessary. These three unique traits that Gojo can apply to his domain expansion make his Immeasurable Void one of the most dangerous domains in the entire series. With that being said, that is all you need to know about Immeasurable Void. If you have anything JJK related that you want to see explained on the channel, make sure to comment it down below and subscribe so you are notified to when I upload. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all next week for another Jujutsu Kaisen explained video.